You are not imagining it. You are not weak for feeling it. And you are not foolish for wondering why, even after the narcissist has walked away, discarded you, or sworn they are done, the bond still feels alive, charged, unresolved. This is not an accident. This is not romance. This is not fate. This is a psychological imprint that runs deep. And today we are going to talk about why narcissists cannot truly break the bond with you, even after leaving, and more importantly, why that says everything about your power and nothing about your weakness. A narcissist does not bond the way healthy people bond. They do not connect through mutuality, safety, or emotional intimacy. They attach through control, regulation, and supply. When they first entered your life, they were not just seeing you as a partner, a friend, or a source of love. They were mapping you. They were learning how you soothe, how you give, how you forgive, how you empathize, how you stay. They were studying the emotional frequency you operate on. And once they plugged into that frequency, it became a resource. Not a relationship, a resource. That is why the bond feels so intense. It was never just about love. It was about nervous system entanglement. You brought depth, warmth, emotional availability, hope, and meaning. They brought intensity, confusion, highs and lows, validation followed by withdrawal. That push and pull did something powerful to your brain and theirs. It created a loop of anticipation, relief, fear, and longing. This is not accidental. This is how trauma bonds are formed. But here is the part people don't talk about enough. While you experience this bond as pain, grief, and loss, the narcissist experiences it as entitlement. They don't miss you the way you miss them. They don't ache for connection the way you do. What they cannot let go of is the fact that you once regulated them. Your presence stabilized their fragile sense of self. Your attention made them feel real. Your emotional labor gave them identity, and that is not something they can easily replace. This is why even after leaving, they hover, they check your social media, they ask about you through others, they resurface months or years later with a casual message, a memory, a crisis, or an apology that feels almost convincing. They don't do this because they suddenly became self-aware or remorseful. They do it because the bond still exists in their mind as access. Access to your energy, your empathy, your responsiveness. You see, narcissists do not experience people as separate individuals with autonomy. They experience people as extensions of themselves. And once you have been categorized as mine, in their internal world, that label does not disappear just because the relationship ended. To them, the bond is dormant, not broken. And the fact that you were able to love deeply, stay loyal, and invest emotionally makes you especially hard to release. But let's be very clear about something. The bond persists not because you were weak, but because you were real. You showed up with consistency. You meant what you said. You loved without keeping score. You tried to repair instead of punish. You held space instead of running. These are not flaws. These are strengths. They only became wounds because they were given to someone who exploits strengths instead of cherishing them. A narcissist cannot break the bond with you because they never internalize love in a healthy way to begin with. Healthy people carry others inside them through memory, warmth, and mutual respect. Narcissists carry people inside them through need, resentment, and ownership. Even when they leave, even when they replace you, even when they appear happy with someone else, the bond with you lingers because it represents a time when they felt powerful, admired, and emotionally fed. And here is the paradox that is difficult to accept but crucial to understand. The more empathic, insightful, and emotionally intelligent you are, the harder it is for a narcissist to fully detach. Not because they value you as a person, but because you reflect back a version of them they are addicted to. You saw their potential. You believed in their narrative. You validated their pain. You tried to understand their wounds. That level of attunement is rare, and once experienced, it leaves an imprint. This is why they may devalue you, criticize you, or rewrite history after the relationship ends. They need to distort you in order to manage the fact that they lost access. If they were to truly acknowledge your worth, they would have to face what they did to you. And accountability is something their psyche is not built to tolerate. So instead, they minimize you, blame you, or act indifferent. But indifference is not the same as detachment. Detachment would require them to grieve, reflect, and integrate. Narcissists do not grieve relationships in the way healthy people do. They do not sit with sadness and loss. They bypass it by replacing, distracting, or numbing. But unresolved bonds do not disappear. They go underground, and they surface when the new supply disappoints, when life destabilizes them, or when they need reassurance of their significance. Meanwhile, you are left holding the emotional aftermath, the questions, the self-doubt, the rumination, the longing. You replay conversations, you analyze moments, you wonder if it was real. Let me tell you something very important. Your pain is not proof that the bond was love. Your pain is proof that your nervous system was trained to associate survival with their approval. That is not romance. That is conditioning. And the reason they not break the bond is the same reason you eventually can. You have the capacity for insight. You can metabolize experience. You can learn, grow, and rewire. They cannot. They remain psychologically frozen, repeating the same patterns with different faces, chasing the same validation, running from the same emptiness. When you start to pull away emotionally, when you stop reacting, explaining, or seeking closure, something shifts. The bond weakens on your side, but it often intensifies on theirs, because your disengagement threatens their sense of control. Your silence feels like abandonment to someone who cannot self-soothe. Your boundaries feel like rejection to someone who equates access with worth. This is why healing can feel so uncomfortable at first. You are not just letting go of a person, you are dismantling a pattern that once felt familiar, even if it was painful. Familiarity is not safety, familiarity is just repetition, and you are choosing to interrupt it. Understand this deeply. The bond does not mean you are destined to return. It does not mean you are incomplete without them. It means you were psychologically involved in a dynamic that exploited your humanity. And once you see it clearly, once you name it without romanticizing it, the bond begins to lose its power over you. The narcissist may always carry a distorted version of you in their mind, someone they almost had, someone who saw through them, someone who mattered more than they want to admit. But hat does not mean they get to occupy space in your future. Their inability to let go is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to reclaim the parts of you that were consumed by confusion, self-blame, and hope that was never met. You do not heal by proving your worth to someone who could not recognize it. You heal by recognizing that the bond existed because of what you brought, not because of what they gave. You brought depth. You brought meaning. You brought emotional reality. And that is why the bond felt so strong. One day you will notice that the thoughts come less often, the triggers lose intensity, the urge to explain yourself fades, and in that quiet you will realize something profound. The bond is no longer driving you. You are. And the narcissist, whether they admit it or not, will feel that shift, because the strongest truth of all is this: narcissists cannot break the bond with you because the bond was built on what they lack. And once you take your energy back, once you stop feeding the dynamic with your pain, attention, or longing, the bond becomes a reminder of something they lost and can never truly replace. You were not broken by them, you were revealed. And that is why they can't let go. What keeps people confused long after the narcissist has gone is the belief that the bond was formed through love in the way love is supposed to work. Mutual care, shared meaning. Two people moving towards something together. But that assumption collapses once you understand the actual mechanics of the attachment. The bond persists because it was never built on love as a reciprocal experience. It was built on regulation, control, and psychological dependency. And once you see that clearly, the lingering grip starts to make sense. A narcissist does not regulate themselves internally. Their sense of worth, stability, and identity is externally sourced. That means they rely on people, situations, admiration, and validation to maintain psychological equilibrium. When they met you, what they discovered was not just a partner, but a stabilizing force. Someone whose presence soothed their anxiety, reflected coherence back to them, and temporarily filled an internal emptiness they cannot confront directly. You became, without consent or awareness, part of their emotional infrastructure. That is a very different thing from being loved. In a healthy bond, two people self-regulate and then co-regulate. They bring something whole to the relationship and allow it to deepen through mutual exchange. In a narcissistic bond, one person self-regulates poorly and uses the other as an external regulator. You calm them, you reassure them, you interpret their emotions, you absorb their volatility. Over time, their nervous system begins to associate relief, stability, and even identity with your presence. That is not intimacy, that is dependence masked as connection. This is why the bond feels unusually strong and unusually difficult to sever. It was just emotional. It was neurological. Your consistency became the baseline against which their internal chaos quieted. When that happens, separation is not experienced as loss in the romantic sense. It is experienced as destabilization, as threat, as something that must be defended against or reversed. And that is why narcissists struggle to let go even when they are the ones who leave. Leaving does not mean releasing. It means seeking regulation elsewhere while keeping the original source psychologically accessible. This is why the bond often continues through indirect contact, monitoring, memory, or sudden reappearances. The narcissist may not want closeness, accountability, or repair, but they want access. They want the option. Because options equal control, and control equals safety in a psyche that cannot tolerate vulnerability. From a philosophical standpoint, this is about ownership rather than relationship. The narcissist does not experience people as sovereign individuals with interior lives as rich as their own. They experience people as roles, functions, mirrors. You were assigned a function, and once assigned, that function does not dissolve simply because the narrative changes. In their internal world, you remain categorized, and that categorization is what keeps the bond alive on their side. What makes this especially painful for you is that you experienced the bond differently. You experienced it as meaning, as possibility, as something that could grow. You invested emotionally because you believed you were building something real. But meaning requires mutual responsibility, and responsibility requires the ability to tolerate discomfort, reflection, and limits. The narcissist avoids all three. So what felt like depth was actually intensity without integration. Intensity can feel profound, but intensity alone does not build anything that lasts. The reason this matters is because many people interpret the narcissist's inability to let go as evidence of specialness, as proof that the connection was unique. But the truth is more sobering and more empowering. The bond persists because you provided something essential to their psychological survival, not because they valued you as a whole person. And once you stop confusing being needed with being loved, your perception shifts. You begin to see that the bond was asymmetrical from the beginning. You were relating to a person. They were relating to a function. This understanding reframes the lingering pull you feel. It is not your heart longing for them. It is your nervous system unwinding from a role it was trained to play. And that process takes time, not because you are weak, but because conditioning runs deep. But unlike them, you are capable of stepping out of the pattern. You can reclaim your agency, your boundaries, and your meaning. They cannot break the bond because the bond props something up that they cannot hold on their own. You can break it because you were never meant to be a prop. You were meant to be a person, And the moment you stop serving as someone else's emotional infrastructure is the moment you begin building a life that actually belongs to you. One of the most damaging misunderstandings people carry after a narcissistic relationship is the belief that their pain proves the bond was extraordinary, that the depth of longing, the obsessive thinking, the ache that lingers long after contact has ended must mean something rare was lost. But that interpretation, while understandable, is precisely what keeps people trapped. Pain is not evidence of destiny, pain is evidence of conditioning. And once you understand how that conditioning works, the experience begins to reorganize itself in your mind. Human beings are meaning-making creatures, but we are also biological organisms. Our brains are designed to learn through association. When relief follows distress repeatedly, the nervous system links the two. In narcissistic dynamics, distress is not incidental, it is structural. The inconsistency, the withdrawal, the emotional unpredictability, the sudden shifts from warmth to coldness, all create heightened states of arousal. And when those states are intermittently resolved by moments of connection, validation, or affection, the brain releases powerful neurochemicals associated with bonding and relief. This is not romance, this is reinforcement learning. The same mechanism that makes gambling addictive operates here. You do not become attached because you are foolish or desperate. You become attached because intermittent reward is one of the most powerful conditioning schedules known to psychology. Your nervous system learns to stay alert, to anticipate, to hope, to endure, because occasionally the reward comes. And when it does, it feels disproportionately meaningful. Not because it is meaningful, but because it ends the pain. Over time, your internal world begins to orbit the relationship. Your mood, your self-concept, your sense of safety become tethered to their availability. That tether is not love, it is survival-based attachment. And when the relationship ends, the nervous system does not immediately recognize that the threat is over. It continues to scan, to crave resolution, to seek the familiar source of relief. That is why letting go feels like withdrawal rather than closure. The narcissist benefits from this dynamic because it keeps you engaged, self-questioning, and emotionally invested. But you experience it as confusion. You ask yourself why you still care, why you still think about them, why your body reacts even when your mind knows better. The answer is not that you were uniquely compatible. The answer is that your system was trained to associate their presence with emotional regulation. This distinction matters because it shifts the locus of responsibility. If the bond was love, then its loss implies personal failure or missed potential. If the bond was conditioning, then it's purrs. Distance implies nothing about your worth or judgment. It simply means a learned pattern has not yet been unlearned. And unlearning takes time. People often shame themselves for not being over it fast enough. But healing is not a decision, it is a recalibration. Your nervous system must relearn safety without volatility, meaning without intensity, connection without fear. That process cannot be rushed by logic alone. It requires consistent experiences that contradict the old pattern. Calm, predictability, boundaries, self-respect enacted, not just understood. What complicates this further is that many people in these dynamics are empathic, conscientious, and reflective. They are inclined to look inward, to take responsibility, to ask what they could have done differently. These traits are strengths in healthy relationships. In narcissistic ones, they become liabilities. You internalize blame that does not belong to you. You search for meaning in chaos. You assume that if the pain is this intense, it must signify depth. But depth is not measured by suffering. Depth is measured by growth, by mutual transformation, by increased capacity for truth and responsibility. If a relationship diminishes your clarity, erodes your self-trust, and conditions you to accept less than reciprocity, it may feel intense, but it is not deep in the way that builds a life. Understanding this does not invalidate your experience, it contextualizes it. It allows you to hold compassion for yourself without romanticizing what harmed you. You can acknowledge that the bond felt real while also recognizing that it was maintained through mechanisms that bypass conscious choice. And that recognition is the beginning of freedom, because once you see that your pain is not proof of love but evidence of conditioning, you stop chasing explanations from the person who caused it. You stop seeking closure where there was never accountability. You redirect your energy toward rebuilding your internal stability rather than resolving an external mystery. You do not heal by going back to the source of the wound to ask why it hurt. You heal by understanding how it hurt, and then refusing to participate in that pattern again. And the most sobering, empowering truth is this: if your nervous system learned the bond, it can unlearn it. But only if you stop mistaking pain for meaning and start choosing patterns that give you something better than intensity. They give you peace.